It was a Tuesday in late October, the air cold enough that you could see your breath, and I was sitting in my living room with a cup of coffee that had gone lukewarm, reading through investment reports I didn't really need to read, just keeping my hands busy, just existing in the quiet comfort of a life I'd built brick by careful brick. The knock came around 9:30. 3 soft taps, hesitant, almost apologetic. The sound was so unlike anything I'd expect that I actually looked up from my laptop, confused. In the 2 years I'd lived in this house, I'd never had a visitor this late. My friends texted before they came over. Delivery drivers used the doorbell. That should have been my first clue something was wrong. My brother never knocked softly. He never knocked at all, really. He announced himself. He walked into rooms like he owned them, like the space should rearrange itself to accommodate his presence. He was the kind of person who opened doors without asking, who sat in the best chair without offering, who dominated conversations without noticing he'd stopped listening years ago. But this knock was different, uncertain, almost frightened. I set down my coffee and walked to the door, checking the video doorbell out of habit, that little app on my phone that shows you who's there before you commit to answering. It's a small luxury, one I'd installed more for convenience than security, but in that moment, I was grateful for it. What I saw on the screen made me freeze completely, made my breath catch in my throat, made the coffee in my stomach turn to acid. He was on his knees, not sitting, not crouching down to tie a shoe or pick something up. On his knees, like some medieval penitent begging for forgiveness at the steps of a cathedral, rain plastering his hair to his skull in dark streaks, his once pristine suit hanging off him like wet cardboard. The suit I recognized. He'd worn it to our father's birthday party 2 years ago, back when things were different, back when he'd stood in that suit and made a toast about success and family and making our parents proud. And the whole time he'd been looking at me with that expression that said, "Unlike some people here." In his trembling hands, he clutched a mess of papers. Even through the grainy doorbell camera, I could see the red stamps, the bold letters, the desperate scramble of too many bills and not enough solutions. Foreclosure notices, repossession letters, eviction warnings, the detritus of a life coming apart at the seams. I stood there for a long moment, phone in hand, watching him kneel in the rain on my porch. Watching him look down at those papers like they were a script he couldn't believe he was reading. Watching his shoulders shake with something that might have been crying or might have been just the cold. A part of me, a small vindictive part I'm not proud of, wanted to leave him there, to go back to my couch, my coffee, my laptop, to let him kneel in the rain until he understood what it felt like to be ignored, dismissed, forgotten. But I'm not that person. I never was, no matter how much he tried to make me into someone small and bitter. I opened the door slowly. The sound of the rain immediately got louder, rushing in with a gust of cold wind that made me shiver. He looked up at the sound, and I saw his face for the first time. God, he looked destroyed. His eyes were red and swollen, his skin blotchy and pale in a way that suggested he hadn't been sleeping, or eating, or taking care of himself in any meaningful way. He looked like someone who'd been holding on by his fingernails and had finally just let go. The sound that came out of him was barely human, a whisper crushed under the weight of demolished pride, rough and broken, and so quiet I almost couldn't hear it over the rain. "Please," he said, not looking directly at me, his eyes fixed somewhere around my shoes. "I need money, anything, I'm begging you." His voice cracked on the word begging, split right down the middle like ice breaking. He who'd never begged for anything in his entire charmed life. He who'd always had everything handed to him, who'd walked through the world like it owed him applause just for showing up. He who'd told me, more times than I could count, that I'd die broke and alone and laughed about it. I stood there in my doorway, warm light spilling out behind me into the cold dark, and I felt something settle into place. Not satisfaction, not revenge, just a kind of terrible clarity. I wasn't angry. I should have been, maybe. I'd spent years imagining what I might say if he ever came to me like this, if the universe ever gave me the opportunity to throw his words back in his face. I'd rehearsed speeches in my head during those long nights building my company when I was too tired to sleep and too wired to rest. But now, standing here, looking down at him, I didn't feel any of the things I'd expected. I was just done. Before we get into it, don't forget to like and subscribe, and hit hype to boost this episode. Drop a comment below with your city or country. I'm always curious where viewers are joining from. Done with him. Done with the whole story we'd been acting out since childhood. Done with the role of the disappointment, the failure, the cautionary tale. Done with caring what he thought, what he said, what he believed about me. I looked down at him, this stranger wearing my brother's face, and said the only words that mattered anymore. Ask the brother you respect more. My voice was calm, quiet. I wasn't being cruel. I was being honest. I was acknowledging out loud the truth we'd both been dancing around for decades. For a moment, he didn't move, didn't react. It was like the words had to travel a long distance to reach him, had to burrow through layers of shock and desperation before they could land. And then his body collapsed forward, just folded in on itself like a demolished building. He sobbed into the wet wood of my porch, shoulders heaving with sounds that didn't sound like they should come from a human throat. Raw. Animal. The sound of something breaking that can't be fixed. Those useless papers scattered around him, getting soaked, the red ink bleeding into pink smudges, the words dissolving into meaninglessness. The fragments of a life that no longer made sense, spreading across my porch like evidence of something no one wanted to investigate. I stood there for one more moment, watching him break down, and I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not guilt. Just a strange, distant sadness for the person he could have been if he'd ever learned to see other people as something more than props in his story. I stepped back inside and closed the door. Softly, not a slam, not even a firm push. Just a gentle click. The way you close a book you've finally finished reading, the way you turn off a light in a room you're never going back to. The rain kept falling. I could hear it drumming on the roof, on the windows, on the porch where my brother was still kneeling. But inside, in my warm, quiet house, in the life I'd built despite him, everything was still. Before we go any further, do me a favor. Like and subscribe if you're finding value in this story. Hit hype to boost this episode so more people can hear it. And drop a comment below with your city or country. I'm genuinely curious where all of you are watching from. It reminds me I'm not alone in this. None of us are. Growing up, my brother Jonathan was everything I wasn't, and our parents made sure everyone knew it. He was the straight A student who never had to study, the kind of kid who could glance at a textbook the night before a test and ace it the next morning. Teachers didn't just like him, they loved him with an intensity that bordered on inappropriate. They wrote him recommendation letters unprompted. They nominated him for awards. They used him as an example when they wanted to shame other students into trying harder. I remember Mrs. Patterson, my 10th grade English teacher, saying once, "Your brother Jonathan wrote the best essay on Gatsby I've ever read. You should ask him for tips." She said it in front of the whole class, with this bright, encouraging smile, like she was doing me a favor. Like she couldn't see how her words landed, how they confirmed what everyone already believed, that I was the lesser version, the rough draft, the mistake they made before they figured out how to do it right. Jonathan was also the athlete. Not the best on any team, but good enough to letter in 3 sports. Good enough that coaches wanted him around because he made everyone else work harder. He had this effortless charisma, this way of making people feel like they were part of something important just by being near him. Our parents ate it up. They went to every game, every match, every meet. They wore his jersey numbers on custom t-shirts. They organized watch parties when his teams made playoffs. Our living room was a shrine to his achievements. Trophies on every shelf, medals hanging from hooks our dad installed specifically for that purpose, framed certificates covering an entire wall. When people came to our house, that's what they saw first. That's what our parents wanted them to see. Evidence of exceptional parenting, of a child who validated every sacrifice they'd made. I was the other one, the creative one, the dreamer, the kid who got B's and C's not because I was stupid, but because I couldn't make myself care about memorizing dates or formulas or vocabulary words that felt completely irrelevant to the life I wanted to build. I was the one who doodled in the margins of my notebooks, who spent hours building websites for fun, who taught himself Photoshop and Illustrator by watching YouTube videos when I should have been studying for chemistry tests. Our parents never said it outright, but I felt it in every interaction. The way my dad's eyes lit up when Jonathan walked into the room like someone had turned on a light switch. The way my mom introduced us to relatives at family gatherings. "This is Jonathan, our eldest. He just made the honor roll again. He's thinking about studying pre-med. And this is Marcus." That pause before my name. That little hesitation that said everything she didn't. And this is Marcus. Period. No accomplishments, no trajectory, just existence. I learned early on not to expect equal treatment, not to hope for it, not to even want it, because wanting it hurt too much. Family dinners became a kind of performance where everyone knew their roles. Jonathan would hold court at the head of the table, even though that should have been our father's spot, talking about his college applications, his internship offers, the scholarship committees that were calling him. Everyone would lean in, nodding, asking follow-up questions that made him sound even more accomplished. Which schools are at the top of your list? What did the interviewer say about your essay? Have you thought about what you'll major in? Questions that assumed success. Questions that treated his future like a certainty, like a red carpet already rolled out, just waiting for him to walk down it. And then, almost as an afterthought, someone would turn to me. Usually my Uncle Rick, because he felt bad that I was being ignored. What about you, Marcus? What are you up to these days? I'd mentioned the small projects I was working on, the website I'd built for a local bakery, the design concept I was developing for a friend's startup idea, the app I was coding that could help people track their finances better. I'd try to sound enthusiastic without being defensive, try to present my work as legitimate without seeming like I was competing with Jonathan. It never worked. My brother would laugh, not a chuckle, not a polite acknowledgement, a full theatrical laugh that cut through whatever I was saying like a knife through paper. He'd lean back in his chair, shake his head, and address the whole table, making sure everyone was watching before he delivered the punchline. Marcus and his little projects, he'd say, smiling in a way that wasn't really a smile. Always chasing the next big thing that's going to make him rich. It's adorable, really. And people would laugh. Uncomfortably, maybe, but they'd laugh. Because Jonathan was the golden child. And when the golden child makes a joke, you laugh. You go along. You don't question whether it's actually funny or just cruel. I remember Thanksgiving 2011. I was 26. Jonathan was 28. He'd just gotten promoted at his company, some middle management position that came with a title that sounded important and a salary that let him buy a new car. He'd been talking about it for 20 minutes straight, and everyone was congratulating him, toasting him, asking about his benefits package like it was the most fascinating topic in the world. I just landed my first paying client for my fledgling design business, $500 to build a website. It wasn't much, but it was the first time someone who wasn't a friend or family member had looked at my work and said, "Yes, this is worth money." I was proud, stupidly, naively proud. When there was a lull in the conversation, I mentioned it. I actually just signed my first real client. It's not huge, but it's a start. My brother's laugh cut through the room like a gunshot. "You'll die broke," he said, loud enough for the whole table to hear. Not joking, not playful, declarative, a fact. "Nobody is investing in you, Marcus. You need to get a real job before you embarrass us." The table went silent. Aunts and uncles shifted in their seats, suddenly fascinated by their plates. My mother looked down, her face flushing red. My father cleared his throat and changed the subject, asking Jonathan about his company's retirement benefits. No one defended me. No one said, "Hey, that was harsh." No one even acknowledged that something cruel had just happened. But my brother kept going. He always kept going. At Christmas, when I mentioned I was working on building a client base. "Still playing entrepreneur? When are you going to grow up? You're almost 30, Marcus." At my cousin's wedding, when someone asked what I did for work, "Marcus thinks he's Steve Jobs. I give him 2 years before he's back living in Mom and Dad's basement." At my grandmother's funeral, of all places, when I mentioned to an aunt that I was working on securing investors for a larger project, "You're delusional, genuinely delusional. No one's giving you money, Marcus. They're humoring you." He didn't just mock me in private. He broadcasted it. He told his friends, turning me into an anecdote at dinner parties. My little brother thinks he's going to be the next tech billionaire, still waiting for him to figure out he's not. He told his coworkers, using me as an example of what happens when you don't have a real career plan. He told people at the gym, at bars, at networking events. Everywhere he went, I became his favorite punchline, the cautionary tale he used to make himself look even better by comparison. I became the lesson he taught people. This is what happens when you don't follow the traditional path. This is what failure looks like. This is what you should avoid. And the worst part? I started to believe him. Not all the way, not completely, but enough that it lived in my head, a constant whisper. Maybe he's right. Maybe you are delusional. Maybe this is all just a waste of time and you're too stupid to see it. That voice made every setback feel like confirmation. Every rejected pitch, every failed project, every month where I barely made rent, it all seemed like evidence that Jonathan had been right all along. But something else was happening too. Something I didn't recognize at the time. I was learning. I learned to stay quiet, to stop defending myself, because defense only invited more attacks, to stop explaining my vision to people who'd already decided I was a joke, because explanation sounded like desperation. I learned to work in silence, to let results speak instead of words. I learned to filter out the noise, even when the noise was coming from my own family. I learned which opinions mattered and which ones were just ego wrapped in concern. And I learned to collect every insult, every dismissive comment, every cruel laugh, and store it somewhere deep. Not as a wound that would fester and poison me, but as fuel. the kind that burns clean and hot and long, the kind that keeps you warm through the coldest nights. Because I knew something my brother didn't. I knew that people who peak early rarely finish strong, that the kids who got everything handed to them never learned how to fight for anything, that success that comes easy disappears just as easily because you never learned what it actually costs. Jonathan thought he'd already won. He thought life was a race that ended with your first good job, your first nice car, your first impressive title. He didn't understand that it had barely started, and neither did I back then. But I would learn. We both would. I built my company the only way I knew how, slowly, painfully, with my own 2 hands and a laptop that took 5 minutes to boot up. My first office was a corner of my studio apartment. My desk was a folding table from Walmart. My chair had a broken wheel that made me tilt slightly to the left every time I sat down. I got used to it. You get used to a lot of things when you don't have a choice. I worked nights, weekends, holidays. While my brother was posting vacation photos from the Bahamas and buying his second luxury car, I was teaching myself code, cold calling potential clients, designing prototypes at 3 a.m. because that was the only time I had quiet enough to think. Every cent I made went back into the business. No fancy dinners, no new clothes, no nights out. I wore the same 3 shirts in rotation for 2 years. I meal prepped on Sundays to save money during the week. I canceled subscriptions I didn't absolutely need. My social life evaporated. Friends stopped inviting me out because they knew I'd say no. Dates fizzled because I didn't have the time or energy to be interesting. My brother told people I was becoming a hermit. He wasn't entirely wrong, but I was learning. God, was I learning? I learned how to read balance sheets, how to negotiate with vendors, how to manage cash flow when there was barely any cash flowing. I learned which marketing channels actually converted and which ones were just expensive ego boosts. I learned to pivot when something wasn't working, to double down when it was, to trust my gut even when everyone around me said I was wrong. And no one believed in me. Not one person in my family looked at what I was building and said, "I think you might actually pull this off." My brother especially made sure of that. At family gatherings, he'd corner me, drink in hand, and offer his advice. "You're wasting your time, Marcus. You know that, right? This whole startup thing, it's a fantasy. A midlife crisis for 20-somethings who don't want to work real jobs." "I'm 34, I'd say." "Exactly. You should have figured this out by now." He'd walk away laughing, shaking his head, and I'd hear him telling whoever was nearby, "Still playing entrepreneur. Can you believe it?" I stopped going to most family events. It wasn't worth the energy. I had work to do, and their disbelief wasn't going to pay my bills or build my product. But every time I wanted to quit, every time the exhaustion became too much and I thought maybe everyone was right, maybe I was delusional, I'd remember my brother's face. That smug, certain expression that said he knew my future better than I did. And I'd get back to work. I built my company the only way I knew how. Slowly, painfully, obsessively, with my own 2 hands and a laptop that took 5 minutes to boot up, and made a whirring sound like it was preparing for takeoff. My first office was a corner of my studio apartment in a neighborhood that was up and coming. In the way real estate agents mean it. Cheap because it wasn't safe yet, full of potential because it had nowhere to go but up. My desk was a folding table I'd bought from Walmart for $29, the kind with metal legs that wobbled unless you wedged a folded napkin under one corner. My chair was a garage sale find with a broken wheel that made me tilt slightly to the left every time I sat down. The foam cushion had a permanent dent shaped like someone else's ass, and the fabric was that scratchy gray material that probably violated some kind of ergonomic code. I got used to it. You get used to a lot of things when you don't have a choice. The apartment itself was barely 400 square feet. Studio, they called it, which is a nice way of saying your bedroom, living room, kitchen, and office all exist in the same space, and you can cook dinner while sitting on your bed. The walls were thin enough that I could hear my neighbor's television through them, could track his whole evening routine by the sounds that bled through. News at 6, game shows at 7, late-night talk shows at 11. On weekends, he had friends over and they'd drink and laugh and play music until 2 in the morning, and I'd sit at my wobbling desk with headphones on, trying to focus, trying not to hate them for having lives that included leisure. I worked nights, weekends, holidays. Christmas Day, I was at that desk. New Year's Eve, same thing. My birthday? I ordered takeout and kept coding. While my brother was posting vacation photos from the Bahamas, pictures of him on white sand beaches with drinks that had little umbrellas, I was teaching myself advanced JavaScript frameworks and cold calling potential clients from a list I'd compiled by hand. The cold calling was the worst. Rejection compressed into 15-second phone calls. Not interested. We have someone. Never heard of you. Call back never. I made 100 calls a day some weeks. Got maybe 2 conversations that lasted longer than a minute, maybe one that turned into a meeting, maybe, if I was lucky, 1 meeting every 20 that turned into actual work. But I kept calling. Because what else was I going to do? Get a real job, like Jonathan suggested? Prove him right? I designed prototypes at 3 in the morning because that was the only time I had quiet enough to think, when my neighbor was finally asleep, when the street below my window stopped its constant background noise of traffic and arguments and sirens. 3 a.m. became my magic hour, my productive zone, the time when I could actually hear myself think. Every cent I made went back into the business. And I mean every cent. No fancy dinners, no new clothes, no nights out with friends. I wore the same 3 shirts in rotation for 2 years. 1 black, 1 gray, 1 navy blue, all from Target, all developing holes in the armpits that I pretended not to notice. I had 2 pairs of jeans that I alternated, washing them in my apartment's basement laundry room with quarters I counted out carefully because quarters were money I could use for other things. I meal prepped on Sundays to save money during the week, bought chicken breasts in bulk when they were on sale, rice in 20-pound bags from the Asian grocery store, frozen vegetables that were nutritious enough to keep me alive. I ate the same lunch every day for months. Rice, chicken, broccoli, hot sauce to make it taste like something. Breakfast was oatmeal. Dinner was whatever protein I could afford with whatever vegetables hadn't gone bad yet. I canceled every subscription I didn't absolutely need. Netflix, gone. Spotify, gone. The gym membership I'd signed up for optimistically, gone after 2 months when I realized I was never going to use it, that every hour I could spend exercising was an hour I could spend building. My phone plan was the cheapest one available. I didn't have a car. I took the bus everywhere or walked. I bought clothes from thrift stores when I absolutely had to buy clothes, which was almost never. I cut my own hair in my bathroom mirror with clippers I'd bought on sale, watching YouTube videos to figure out how not to completely butcher it. My social life evaporated like water in the desert sun. Friends stopped inviting me out because they knew I'd say no. I watched their lives continue on social media, all the bars and restaurants and concerts and weekend trips, and I felt this strange mix of envy and superiority. Envy because it looked fun, because I remembered what it felt like to have leisure time, to spend money on experiences instead of server costs. Superiority because I was building something and they were just consuming. Dates fizzled before they started. I'd match with someone on an app, message back and forth, and then they'd ask what I did for fun, and I'd realize I didn't have an answer. My work on my company wasn't attractive. It wasn't mysterious or intriguing. It was just sad, the kind of thing people heard and immediately lost interest in. One woman told me, after our first and only date, "You seem more married to your work than interested in meeting someone." She wasn't wrong. I was married to it. Obsessed with it. It was the only relationship I could afford to maintain. My brother found all of this hilarious. He'd call occasionally, usually when he was drunk, usually with friends in the background, and he'd put me on speaker so they could all hear. "Marcus, tell everyone what you're up to. Tell them about your big business." And I'd hear him laughing, hear his friends laughing, and I'd just hang up, block the number for a while, unblock it later when I felt like I should give family another chance, repeat the cycle. At family gatherings I still occasionally attended, he'd corner me with a drink in his hand and that smile on his face, the one that wasn't really a smile, and offer his advice. "You're wasting your time, Marcus. You know that, right? This whole startup thing, it's a fantasy, a midlife crisis for 20-somethings who don't want to work real jobs." "I'm 34, I said once. "Exactly. You should have figured this out by now." He'd walk away laughing, shaking his head, and I'd hear him telling whoever was nearby, "Still playing entrepreneur, can you believe it? Some people never learn." I stopped going to most family events after that. It wasn't worth the energy. It wasn't worth spending gas money I didn't have to drive somewhere I wasn't wanted just to be reminded that I was the family disappointment. I had work to do anyway, always work to do. But here's what no one saw, what my brother especially couldn't see because he'd never had to do it. I was learning. God, was I learning. I learned how to read balance sheets and profit and loss statements, how to understand what the numbers actually meant beyond the surface level. I learned how to negotiate with vendors who tried to overcharge because they thought I was too small to matter. I learned how to manage cash flow when there was barely any cash flowing, how to prioritize expenses so the business stayed alive even when it probably shouldn't have. I learned which marketing channels actually converted and which ones were just expensive ego boosts. Facebook ads? Waste of money for my business. Content marketing and SEO? Slow burn, but it worked. Cold outreach? Terrible response rate. But the clients who did respond were exactly the kind I wanted. I learned to pivot when something wasn't working, to double down when it was, to trust my gut even when every piece of advice I was getting said to do the opposite. I learned that most business advice is survivorship bias from people who got lucky and convinced themselves it was skill. I learned to work within my constraints instead of resenting them. Couldn't afford to hire developers. Learn to code better yourself. Can't afford paid advertising. Get creative with organic reach. Can't afford fancy tools. Find free alternatives or build your own. I learned that persistence beats talent, that showing up every day beats occasional bursts of inspiration, that small, consistent progress compounds into something significant given enough time. And I learned something else, something my brother never understood. I learned that the people who believe in you least are often giving you the most valuable gift, even if they don't mean to. They force you to believe in yourself. They force you to build something so undeniable that their opinions stop mattering. They force you to develop a core of self-worth that doesn't require external validation. My brother thought he was crushing me with his mockery. He thought he was teaching me a lesson about staying in my lane, about accepting my place, about being realistic. What he was actually doing was teaching me to survive without his approval, to thrive without his belief, to succeed specifically because he said I couldn't. Every time he laughed, I worked another hour. Every time he told someone I'd die broke, I refined my pitch deck. Every time he called me delusional, I closed another deal. He was my motivation, even though he meant to be my obstacle. And year by year, brick by brick, line of code by line of code, I built something that worked. It started small, 5 clients, 10 clients, 50 clients, revenue that barely covered expenses, then revenue that covered expenses and paid me minimum wage, then revenue that paid me a livable salary, then revenue that let me hire someone part-time, then full-time, then a team. I moved out of that studio apartment into a 1-bedroom that had an actual office space, then into a 2-bedroom where I could have a bedroom and an office. Then, finally, into a real office space, a small commercial unit, in a building full of other small businesses, where I had a door with my company name on it. That felt like winning. That felt like proof. I bought a desk that didn't wobble, a chair that supported my back, a computer that didn't sound like it was dying every time I opened more than 3 tabs, and all of it, every single piece, I built without my family's belief, without their support, without their respect. Which meant when it started to succeed, really succeed, it was mine in a way it could never have been otherwise. They couldn't take credit. They couldn't claim they'd always believed in me. They couldn't rewrite history and pretend they'd been supportive. All they could do was watch. And my brother especially couldn't stand it. Year 4 was when everything started to shift. My product, a SaaS platform that helped small businesses automate their customer service workflows, started gaining real traction. Not viral hit traction, but the steady, sustainable kind that actually matters. Renewals were strong. Referrals were coming in. The churn rate dropped below 3%. I hired my first 2 employees, then 5, then 12. Revenue doubled, then tripled. And then the emails started coming. Investors who'd ignored me for years suddenly wanted calls. Venture capital firms I'd pitched to back when I had nothing but mock-ups and hope were now circling back, saying they'd love to explore opportunities. I took meetings. Lots of meetings. I learned to speak their language, to show them not just what I'd built, but what it could become. I learned when to push and when to listen. I learned that negotiation is just another form of storytelling, and I'd always been good at stories. The first serious offer came in February. A mid-sized private equity firm wanted to acquire the company for $2.1 million. I almost said yes. That number felt impossible, unreal, like something that happened to other people. But my lawyer told me to wait. "You've got leverage," she said. "Use it." So I did. 2 more firms came in with competing offers. The bidding war lasted 6 weeks. It was the most stressful, exhilarating, terrifying period of my life. I barely slept. I went over every term sheet, every clause, every projection with a fine-tooth comb. My brother, somehow, found out. I don't know who told him. Maybe a mutual friend. Maybe he was stalking my LinkedIn. Doesn't matter. He called me laughing. "I heard you're in talks with investors," he said, doing air quotes I could practically hear through the phone. "Marcus, come on, be serious. No one's buying your little side project. You're getting played." "Thanks for the concern," I said, and hung up. 3 days later, the deal closed. $3.7 million, all cash, paper signed, money wired, real. I sat in my lawyer's office staring at the confirmation email, and I didn't feel victorious. I felt relief. The kind of relief you feel when you finally put down something impossibly heavy you've been carrying for years. I didn't post about it on social media, I didn't call my brother, I didn't throw a party or make some grand announcement. I just went home, ordered Thai food, and watched a movie. Over the next few months, I made quiet changes. I bought a house in a neighborhood I'd always admired. Nothing ostentatious, just a 3-bedroom craftsman with good light and a backyard. I paid off my student loans. I put money into index funds and real estate. I bought clothes that actually fit. I started going to the gym regularly, eating better, sleeping like a human being again. I upgraded my life, but I didn't broadcast it. I wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone anymore. But people noticed. And eventually, my brother did too. I didn't cause what happened to my brother. I want to be absolutely clear about that. I didn't orchestrate some elaborate revenge scheme. I didn't sabotage his career or whisper poison into the right ears or pull strings to make his life fall apart. I didn't have to. Life has a way of correcting imbalances, of exposing foundations built on sand, and my brother's entire existence was built on an imbalance he refused to acknowledge. He'd been working for a large tech company for 8 years, middle management, solid 6-figure salary, good benefits. The kind of job that looks impressive on paper and feels stable right up until the moment it isn't. He had a title that sounded important, Senior Director of Strategic Partnerships. He managed a team of 12. He had an expense account. He traveled for conferences. He wore suits that cost more than my first laptop. It was the kind of success that my parents bragged about to their friends, that relatives asked about at gatherings, that made him feel like he'd won the game of life in his 20s and could just coast from there. But he'd stopped growing, stopped learning, stopped being hungry. He'd reached a plateau and decided it was a peak, and that was his first mistake. The layoff started in the spring of year 5, right around when my company was starting to take off. His company, like so many others in the tech sector, had overhired during the boom years, had expanded too fast on the assumption that growth would continue forever, had built organizational structures that were top-heavy with managers who managed the people who actually did the work. When the market corrected, when investor money dried up, when boards started demanding profitability instead of growth at any cost, those structures became untenable. They started with contractors, then consultants, then full-time employees in departments that weren't core to the mission, whatever that meant. My brother watched it happen from his position in middle management, secure in the knowledge that it wouldn't touch him. He'd been there 8 years. He had good reviews, he knew people, he'd survived previous rounds of cuts. He was confident the way people are confident when they've never really been tested, when success has always come easy enough that they don't know what failure looks like up close. But middle management is always the first to go when companies want to flatten hierarchies and cut costs. Middle managers don't generate revenue, they don't write code or close deals or create products. They coordinate, facilitate, oversee. And in a crisis, companies realize they can coordinate, facilitate, and oversee with fewer people doing more work. He got the call on a Thursday in April. I know because my mother called me that night, crying, telling me what happened like I was supposed to feel sorry for him. His manager had asked for a meeting at 9 a.m. Just the two of them, no agenda in the calendar invite. He'd known something was wrong, but had convinced himself it was about a project delay or a budget issue, something he could explain, fix, manage. Instead, they'd thanked him for his service, told him the company was restructuring and his position was being eliminated, handed him a severance package, 2 months paid, health insurance through the end of the quarter, a letter of recommendation they'd already drafted. They were very sorry. It wasn't personal, it was just business. They gave him an hour to clean out his desk. A security guard stood nearby while he packed his personal items into a cardboard box. Framed photos of vacations he'd taken, awards he'd won, the expensive wireless headphones he'd bought with his last bonus, a coffee mug his team had given him that said, "World's Best Boss." By noon, he was walking out of the building with that box, and his badge no longer worked in the reader at the door. The first month, he wasn't worried. He had savings. Not as much as he should have for someone who'd been making his salary, but enough for a few months. He had a network. He knew people at other companies. He had 8 years of experience at a respected firm. He'd land something quickly. This was just a minor setback, an opportunity to level up, to find something better. He updated his LinkedIn, changed his status to open to new opportunities, started reaching out to former colleagues, to recruiters, to anyone who might have a lead. The responses were encouraging at first. Coffee meetings, introductory calls, a few first-round interviews. He was confident. He knew how to interview. He'd always been good at selling himself, at projecting success and competence. But he kept making it to final rounds and losing out. The feedback, when he got any, was vague. Great conversation, but we found someone who's a better fit. We've decided to go in a different direction. We're putting this role on hold for now. What they meant, what they didn't say, was that he was expensive, that younger candidates would accept lower salaries, that his 8 years at one company made him look stale rather than experienced, that his confidence came across as arrogance in a market where desperation was becoming the norm. Now, the second month, worry started to creep in. He was burning through savings faster than expected. The mortgage on his house was $4,200 a month. The car payment was $890. The credit cards he'd been carrying balances on were accruing interest. Utility bills, insurance, all the small recurring costs that add up when you don't have income. His wife Sarah, who'd married him when he was riding high, when success seemed permanent and inevitable, started asking questions he didn't have good answers for. Maybe you should take that project manager role, even if it pays less. Do we really need to stay in this house? Maybe we should downsize. Have you thought about asking your family for help? That last suggestion stung the most. Ask his family for help? Ask his parents, who were retired on a fixed income? Ask his younger brother, the one he'd spent years mocking, the one who was supposed to die broke? His pride wouldn't survive it. So he told Sarah they'd be fine, that something would come through any day, that he just needed a little more time. But time was the one thing he was running out of. Month 3, month 4. The interviews slowed down. The responses to his applications became form letters or silence. His savings account dropped below 4 figures. Then 3, then 2. The arguments with Sarah escalated. Not screaming fights, but worse. Quiet, disappointed conversations that ended with her sleeping in the guest room, with him lying awake at night staring at the ceiling, wondering how everything had gone so wrong so fast. His pride wouldn't let him take a step down. Every job below his previous level felt like admitting defeat, like proving everyone right who'd ever doubted him. He'd spent so many years being the successful one, the golden child, the example everyone else should follow. The idea of accepting a lesser position felt like erasing his entire identity, so he held out, kept applying to senior director roles, VP roles, positions that matched his self-image even as the market made it clear those positions weren't available for someone with his profile. The car went first. He'd missed 3 payments on his BMW. The finance company didn't care about his excuses, about the job search, about the fact that he'd never missed a payment before. They sent a tow truck at 6 in the morning on a Monday. He watched from the bedroom window as they hooked it up and drove away, this symbol of his success disappearing down the street while neighbors peeked through their curtains. Sarah left 2 weeks after that, not with drama, not with a fight, just a quiet, sad conversation over coffee that ended with her saying, "I can't do this anymore. I'm sorry." She wasn't cruel about it. She didn't list his failures or throw past mistakes in his face. She was just done. Exhausted from carrying the weight of his denial, tired of watching him refuse to adapt, frustrated that he'd prioritize his pride over their survival. She packed a suitcase and went to stay with her sister, filed for divorce a month later. The lawyer's letter arrived the same week as the pre-foreclosure notice from the mortgage company. That's when he started to break. I heard about it through family, through my mother who called with updates I didn't ask for. "He's not doing well, Marcus. He's lost weight. He's not returning calls. I'm worried about him." I didn't know what she wanted me to say. That I'd swoop in and save him? That I'd write him a check and make all his problems disappear? That I'd forgive years of cruelty because he was finally experiencing consequences? The house went into foreclosure in July. 90 days to catch up on missed payments or vacate. He didn't have 90 days. He didn't have $90. His friends, the ones who used to admire him, who'd listened to him brag about his salary and his success and his foolish little brother who'd never amount to anything, they all suddenly got very busy when he reached out. Texts went unanswered. Calls went to voicemail. Lunch invitations were politely declined with excuses that weren't really excuses. He'd built his entire social circle on being the successful one, and now that success was gone, he discovered he had nothing underneath. No real friendships, no deep connections, no one who valued him for anything beyond his status. It's a painful thing to learn at 37, that you're alone. My parents tried to help. They sent him money here and there, a few $100s that disappeared into the black hole of his debt. They offered to let him move back into their house, but he refused. "Temporarily," they said, "just until you get back on your feet." But he knew what it would mean. Moving back home at 37, sleeping in his childhood bedroom, being the failure he'd always accused me of being. The irony was too much. Someone, I never found out who, finally told him what he needed to hear. "Maybe you should apologize to Marcus. Maybe he could help." I imagine that conversation destroyed something fundamental in him. The last little bit of the person he used to be, the part that believed he was better, smarter, more deserving. But he still had one card left to play. One last attempt at salvaging something from the wreckage. He could beg. The text came on a Tuesday afternoon in late September while I was in a meeting with potential partners about licensing my technology. My phone buzzed on the conference room table. I glanced down, saw his name, and felt my stomach tighten. We hadn't spoken in almost 2 years. Not since that phone call when he'd laughed about my acquisition talks. Not since I'd hung up on him and decided I was done trying to maintain a relationship with someone who only saw me as a punchline. I silenced the phone and finished the meeting, made the deal, shook hands, walked out to my car and sat there in the parking lot for 10 minutes before I opened the message. "Hey, you got a minute? Need a small loan, nothing big?" I stared at those words for a long time, trying to process the sheer, unexamined audacity of them. After everything, after years of mockery and humiliation and public dismissal, after telling everyone who'd listen that I'd die broke, that I was an embarrassment, that I was delusional and wasting my life. After making me the cautionary tale, he used to make himself look better. After never, not once, apologizing or acknowledging or even slightly adjusting his behavior. After all of that, his opening move was, "Need a small loan, nothing big." No greeting, no, "How are you?" No acknowledgement of the years of silence, no, "I know we haven't talked in a while," but no humility, no recognition of the irony. Just the casual assumption that I'd help him because that's what family does. That blood obligation would override memory, override hurt, override self-respect. I thought about not responding, just leaving him on red, letting the silence speak for itself. But something in me needed to say it out loud, needed to draw the boundary clearly so there could be no misunderstanding. I typed back, "Sorry, can't help." 3 dots appeared immediately, disappeared, appeared again. I could picture him on the other end, typing and deleting, trying to find the right words to make me change my mind. "Seriously? It's not a lot. I'll pay you back." The presumption in that message was staggering, as if the issue was whether he'd pay me back, as if I was worried about the money and not about the principle of giving someone access to resources they'd never once believed I deserved. I said no, I typed. The 3 dots appeared again. This time they stayed for a while. I could imagine him getting angrier, the realization settling in that I wasn't going to cave, that I meant what I said. "Wow, money really changed you, huh?" And there it was. The thing he'd been holding back, the real feeling underneath the fake casual request. The accusation wrapped in disappointment, the suggestion that I was the one who'd changed, that I was the problem. Not him, never him, never the person who'd spent years making me feel small, who'd turned my life into a joke he told at parties, who'd publicly hoped for my failure because my success would make his look less impressive. No, I was the one who'd changed. I was the one who'd let money corrupt me. I was the villain in his story because I wouldn't rescue him from consequences he'd earned. The psychological projection was almost impressive. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say that he'd hear, nothing that would penetrate the fortress of his ego. I muted the conversation and went back to work, trying to focus on the partnership deal I just closed, trying not to let his words burrow into my head the way they used to. But they did anyway. They always did. Money changed me, as if I hadn't been exactly this person all along, as if my refusal to accept mistreatment was something new, something the money had caused, rather than something the money had finally given me the freedom to express. I'd always had boundaries, I just never had the leverage to enforce them. Over the next few weeks, I heard through family that he was getting worse, more desperate, more isolated. The foreclosure was moving forward. He'd burned through what little savings he had left. He was applying to jobs he'd once considered beneath him, retail positions and customer service roles, and getting rejected anyway. Overqualified, they said. Unlikely to stay. Too expensive. My mother called. "Marcus, he's your brother. He made mistakes, but he needs help." "He didn't make mistakes, Mom. He made choices, for years, and now those choices have consequences." "So you're just going to let him lose everything?" "He let himself lose everything. I'm just not saving him from it." Her voice got small, disappointed. "This isn't like you." But she was wrong. This was exactly like me. She just never paid enough attention to know who I actually was, what I actually believed, what I was actually capable of when pushed. My father sent a text. "Family is supposed to help each other." I didn't respond because what he meant was, you're supposed to help him. Not, he should have helped you when you were struggling. Not, we should have defended you when he was tearing you down. Just, you have resources now, so you should share them, regardless of how you were treated. A cousin I barely knew sent me a long message about forgiveness and family values and how success meant nothing if you couldn't share it with the people you loved. I blocked them. I didn't have the energy to explain that you can't share success with people who spent years hoping you'd fail. That love is supposed to be reciprocal. That family is supposed to mean mutual respect and support, not just obligation flowing one direction. People who'd never defended me when I was being mocked were now asking me to be the bigger person. People who'd never questioned my brother's cruelty were now questioning my refusal to rescue him from it. The cognitive dissonance was exhausting, but I held firm. I'd spent too many years letting other people define what I owed them, what I should do, who I should be. I wasn't going back to that. I'd built something I was proud of, something that was mine, and I wasn't going to let guilt or obligation or manipulation take it from me. So when the texts kept coming, I stopped responding. When family members called, I let it go to voicemail. When people tried to corner me at the few family events I still attended, I politely excused myself and left early. I was done explaining. Done justifying. Done defending my decision to people who'd never had to defend me. And then came the night he showed up at my door. I've replayed that moment 1,000 times in my head, and it never gets easier to process. My brother, who'd spent our entire lives looking down on me, was on his knees in the rain, begging. The video doorbell captured everything. I watched it later, more than once, not out of cruelty, but out of disbelief. I needed to see it again to believe it had really happened. His face was a mess, red, swollen. He'd been crying before he even got to my house. The suit he wore, once a symbol of his corporate success, hung off him like a costume from a play that had closed. In his hands, the papers told the whole story. Foreclosure notice, final warning. Repossession letter, vehicle seized. Eviction warning, 10 days to vacate. Bank statements showing negative balances. Credit card bills with numbers that made my chest tighten, even though they weren't my problem. When I opened the door, he looked up at me with eyes I didn't recognize. All the confidence, all the superiority, all the casual cruelty that had defined him for so long was gone. What was left was raw and desperate and human in a way I'd never seen him be. "Please," he whispered, and his voice broke around the word. "I need money. Anything. I'm begging you." He held up the papers like evidence at a trial, like proof that he'd been wrong about everything and now deserved mercy. I stood there in my doorway, warm light spilling out behind me, and looked down at him. I wasn't angry. I should have been, maybe, but I wasn't. I'd moved past anger years ago, during those long nights building something he said would fail. Anger is hot and reactive, and what I felt was cold and final. I was just done. I thought about all the times he'd mocked me, all the family gatherings where he'd made me the punchline, all the people he'd told that I was a joke, a failure, a cautionary tale. I thought about the opportunities I'd missed because his voice was in my head telling me I wasn't good enough. I thought about the years I'd spent proving him wrong, not because I wanted to, but because his disbelief had become the obstacle I couldn't ignore. And I thought about what he'd never given me, respect. Not admiration, not praise, just basic respect. The kind you show someone because they're trying, because they're working hard, because they're family, and you're supposed to believe in each other. He'd never given me that. He'd given me contempt instead, freely and publicly, and now he wanted something from me that he'd never been willing to offer. I looked at him, this broken version of the person who'd once seemed invincible, and I said the only thing that felt true. Ask the brother you respect more." My voice was quiet, calm. I wasn't being cruel. I was being honest. His face crumpled. The last bit of pride that had been holding him together just collapsed, and he fell forward, hands slapping into the wet wood of my porch, shoulders heaving with sobs that sounded like they were tearing him apart. The papers scattered around him, getting soaked, the red stamps bleeding in the rain until they were just pink smudges on white. I watched for a moment, and then I stepped back. I closed the door, softly. The way you close something that's finally finished. Through the window, I could see him still kneeling there, breaking down in the dark, but I didn't open the door again. I walked back to my living room, sat down, and picked up my coffee. It had gone cold. I didn't sleep well that night. Not because I felt guilty, but because I kept waiting to feel guilty, and it never came. I sat in my living room for hours, the house quiet around me, thinking about what had just happened. My brother had been at my door, my brother had begged, my brother had broken. And I'd said no. In movies, this is where the hero has a change of heart, where they realize that family is everything, that forgiveness is the only path forward, that being the bigger person means swallowing your pain and extending grace even when it hasn't been earned. But this wasn't a movie. This was my life. And I'd spent too many years letting other people tell me what I should do, how I should feel, who I should be. I didn't want revenge. I never wanted revenge. Revenge would have meant I was still attached, still invested in his opinion of me, still trying to prove something. What I wanted was respect, and since he'd never given it freely, I wasn't going to give him what he needed until he understood what he'd taken from me. But more than that, what I wanted was peace. The kind of peace that comes from knowing you've set a boundary and held it, even when it hurt, even when it would have been easier to give in, even when people would judge you for it. Over the next few days, I heard from family members. My mother called, her voice thick with tears. "Marcus, he's your brother. He made mistakes, but he needs help." "He didn't make mistakes, Mom. He made choices, for years, and now those choices have consequences. So you're just going to let him lose everything?" "He let himself lose everything. I'm just not saving him from it." She hung up disappointed in me. I'd spent my whole life being the disappointment, so it didn't sting the way it might have before. My father texted, "This isn't like you." I didn't respond because he was wrong. This was exactly like me. He'd just never paid enough attention to know who I actually was. A cousin I barely knew sent me a long message about forgiveness and family values and how success meant nothing if you couldn't share it with the people you loved. I blocked them. I didn't have the energy to explain that you can't share success with people who spent years hoping you'd fail. But here's what I learned in the weeks and months that followed. Not all family deserves access to you. Blood doesn't entitle someone to your time, your money, your energy, or your forgiveness. Family is supposed to be the people who see you struggling and help lift you up, not the ones who see you struggling and push you down for entertainment. Success doesn't require forgiving cruelty. You don't have to make peace with people who harmed you just because you've moved past them. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is let them stay in the past where they belong. Boundaries are sometimes the real victory. Not money, not public vindication, not watching someone who hurt you suffer, just the quiet, powerful knowledge that you will no longer accept mistreatment, that you've drawn a line and you're willing to hold it no matter who tries to cross it. I didn't open my door that night because I wanted to hurt my brother. I closed it because I'd finally learned to protect myself. And that, more than any amount of money, is what freedom feels like. People ask me sometimes if I regret it, if I wonder what would have happened if I'd helped him, if I lie awake at night thinking about him on his knees in the rain. I don't. I sleep fine now. Better than I ever did when I was trying to prove myself to people who'd already decided I wasn't worth believing in. My brother taught me what failure looks like. Not losing your job, or your house, or your car, but losing your integrity, your empathy, your ability to see other people as anything more than props in your own story. And he taught me what self-worth feels like, knowing that you don't owe your hurt to anyone, not even family. Especially not family. I built something from nothing. I did it without his belief, without his support, without his respect. And when he came asking for help he'd never offered me, I said no, not out of spite, out of self-respect. That's the lesson here. That's what I want people to understand. You don't have to set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm, especially not someone who handed you the matches and told you to light yourself up years ago. I closed the door that night because I'd finally learned what I was worth, and no amount of rain or tears or kneeling was going to make me forget it again.